Welcome to the Under the Hat podcast,
the show where we talk about everything and anything that is top of mind in education.
The goal is to provide meaningful conversations to what is currently happening in our classrooms.
Stories, pains,
moments of success.
We want to hear it all.
Friends, happy Saturday and welcome back to another episode of Under the Hat. Sophie and I could not be more excited about this conversation because it's almost like we get to chat with a friend of a friend. And so that's really, at least for me, how it all got started with me getting to know the guest that we have today. Sophie, how excited are you about this chat?
I am extremely excited. Wow. I'm so excited I can't even talk. I'm so excited. I've met TR at FETC, not this past time, but the time before. And we got to chat a lot. So they are an extremely awesome person and chill and amazing, have lots of ideas. Tony Rose was a passionate sixth grade English teacher and English subject coordinator, and now Modern Classroom Project fellow at DC. It was a project fellow at DC International School in Washington, DC. She's been dedicated to creating student-centered learning environments that prioritize social justice, reading and storytelling beyond the classroom. TR's designated hype person, human-centered educator, storyteller, facilitator, podcaster, connector, and instructional designer. In their free time, they enjoy reading, laughing, and being with their students, dancing with their dog, and indulging in ice cream, working out, and napping. TR, tell us a little bit about your education journey.
Sophie, I feel like you just read my entire life, and I am excited to meet myself. Like, what? Yeah, it's really funny. Lately, I've been in this journey of just humanizing everything that I do, right? So I've been in education since 2010, and I've always wanted to be an educator, actually, ever since I was little, because my grandma was an English teacher, and so I was like, you know what? I really love anything and everything to do with teaching. And I know growing up in an Asian household, our parents definitely had other plans and dreams for me. And so they tried to steer me away from education, actually, because they always said that it was going to be really difficult. It was really challenging, right? That there are moments where I'm going to question everything that I've decided to do. And the fact that, like, I will not make any money. Now, mind you, money is not everything, right? But it does help. And so I think my parents were just really concerned about how I was going to make a good living out of being an educator. So, but thank goodness I didn't listen to them. And I still, I rebelled and was like, nope, my life, my decisions, I'm gonna do what I want. And so I went into school. I got accepted actually for journalism, and I quickly shifted to early childhood education. And then also quickly found out that I am not the one for early childhood learners, because okay, like I taught kindergarten for a year, and I don't know why I did that. I didn't like I was a student teacher, right? And just quickly realized, like, oh, they don't understand my sarcasm, they don't understand my humor. They want to cling on to my leg, and they're snotty, and I can't. This is horrible. So my professor was actually the one who told me, you know what, I think you'd really vibe with middle schoolers. I think middle school is going to be something that's going to end up being your passion. You may not know now, but I know just based off of like your traits and just the way you are as a human, middle schoolers are going to love you. And thank goodness I listened. I actually listened to an adult this time and said, you know what? Okay, I'll try middle school, and ended up just like falling in love. So I taught in DeKalb County in Georgia for my first 3 years of teaching. Absolutely fell in love. The kids are hilarious. It is the right amount of toxicity that I need in my life, right? Of like, okay, cool. We will teach you, we will learn together, and then you want to cuss me out? Like, what why wouldn't I want that, right? And then I went from Georgia to Baltimore City. So if y'all have ever
Mm.
watched The Wire, it is spot on from my experience. I think it's like episode 4 or something. It's wild that I remember, where they just like cover the education system in Baltimore City. And I was pretty ignorant, right? I didn't teach in an urban school setting. I taught in DeKalb County, which is like a outside the perimeter kind of deal in Atlanta. So I go into Baltimore City and not doing any research, because in our 20s, who does research? Not this one.
Fair.
um, and I ended up, just it was a wake up. Like, it was just a very insightful experience of like, holy cow, I've been in this like little thing of heaven in DeKalb County in Georgia, and then going into Baltimore City, not knowing that there weren't any funding, that there were just so many inequities that were happening,
Mm.
especially with our kids of color, um, and specifically Black kids, right? Because I did teach in an all Black school. And so it was just such an enlightening or insightful experience where my students really humbled me. This was my 4th year of teaching, and I felt like I was a first-year teacher, which is a nice reminder for myself, because I was getting cocky, right? Like, okay, 4 years in, I got this. I was like, no, it depends really on environments, right? So my kids taught me so much that year about just, again, being a human before being a teacher, really getting to know my students, establishing those relationships, and figuring out how to gain their trust, because a lot of my students didn't have a teacher. Their teacher quit 2 weeks in, and so they've always had subs. And this is not like a one school year. It's like multiple school years, right? And so I understand that they were jaded. I understood that, like, okay, before I could even come into having conversations or teaching about content, I need to get to know these kids, right? Like, I need to get to know who they are. I need to get to know what is relevant to them. I need to know all of these things about them that, that irks them, that makes them happy, all of these things. And so I felt like Baltimore City was probably the most influential year in my life, in my teaching career. And then I went to DC. So I was in DC for about 6 years, actually. Again, more middle school, and the DC kids were trying to be turned up, and I was like, oh, y'all got nothing on Baltimore City kids, okay? Y'all could do nothing to me. I have gone through it all with my Baltimore City kids. They got me prepared, okay? So y'all can try everything and I will be okay. And so I think one of the things too with being a teacher, is that it was my 5th grade teacher who cemented or confirmed the fact that I wanted to be a teacher, was because of her, right? I just moved from the Philippines, and so I was adjusting to the culture shock. I moved to South Georgia, and it was my English teacher who kind of introduced me to the world of literature, right? I mean, my reality was so rough as a kid, because again, there was just so many ignorant and racist things that were happening around me, because they didn't know who I was and they didn't know where I came from. And so my 5th grade English teacher was like, "Hey, here's Harry Potter," right? And we could talk about all the things happening with that later on, but like, here's Harry Potter. Here's all the other books that she just like introduced to me. And so I figured, you know what? I want to do exactly that. If I can just make a difference in one child's life, I
Mm.
know that I'm set, right? And I've just loved reading and writing. And so that was what kind of got me into teaching middle school reading and writing. And I have to say, Steve and Sophie, my biggest flex is getting people to read. Like,
Mm.
I love it. My biggest flex.
So that's probably one of the biggest reasons why you like to do these book clubs, then, right?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
I'm an avid reader. For the longest time, I used reading to avoid reality, because reality is real crusty out here. And
Did you say
I love
crusty?
I did, Steve.
That's hilarious. Okay, please continue.
I love that word. It is so much more articulate than any like it just articulates exactly how I'm feeling about the world right now. And so
Mhm.
for the longest time I used it as a way to avoid a lot of my realities. And then now understanding that, you know what? I actually use it to, I don't know, learn, right? To gain different perspectives, to gain empathy, to gain knowledge about different cultures that I'm not aware of. And being able to share this like joy of reading with students, with adults, it's just so much fun. And so I am in multiple book clubs because I love connecting with everyone, and we have this shared experience, right? And so I love that you mentioned the book club, Sophie, because we do have a book club with Cami. We do have a book club that we're talking about, like, meeting every learner's needs, right? Because that's what we want to do in education. And so all the books, all the shared experiences. I could talk about books all day long. I could talk about writing all day long and just creating spaces for students to be able to, students and adults now. I always forget that I work with mostly adults now. So I have to say, like, students and adults, providing a space for them to showcase and highlight their stories and their experiences, and really provide a space where they can be brave and show up as authentically as themselves, right? Because why not? Like, I feel like that is more impactful than theme and inferences and context clues that I'm having to teach.
And alliteration and
I mean, those are fun.
literally,
Those are fun.
I love alliteration, and it's really the only thing that I remember from high school English.
So like this joy of reading um really resonates with me because as a kid, like child Steve hated reading for a wide range of reasons, right? But now I love reading. And I think this joy of reading often gets lost in our K through 12 environment, right? Like something happens between kinder to because I taught 12th grade, so I kind of saw the end of it for better or for worse. But like there's something that happens between K through 12 where the curiosity gets squashed. The like the motivation and the curiosity of like what could be found in a book, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, what have you. There's it's just like, man, I don't want to read. It's like, and but you do have the few kids that they really dig it. But I think like as a whole, like what I saw was like that gets killed. So I kind of I just love that's part of your focal point.
Yeah, I mean, and Steve, there's so many like reasons to why students have a love-hate relationship with reading, right? And we can talk about standardized testing. We can talk about
Mm,
how education has really tied success into how fast you can read or how much you understand, right? And so it really does kill that joy of like, you know what, I'm trying to read, but then you're telling me I'm failing because I'm not reading fast enough or because I need more time to process what we're actually reading, right? So it's been penalized, and I think that's why students turn away from it. And then also just the fact that like we're reading things that are not relevant to students' lives, right?
mm,
We're reading books that are, gosh, have been written like many, 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 many years ago. And yes, we can still learn, right? But yes, we can learn, and there are other options. And so I think like when it comes to reading, options are always good. Having choice is always good, right? And so I think that's one of the ways that I have conversations with students too, of like, hey, let's talk about how you're feeling about reading, right? Let's talk about why this is something that you don't like to do. And then also, hey, tell me something that you're really into. And then I find a book
mm,
that could be really good for them, right? That could pique that, interest. And so every year of my teaching career when I was in the classroom, Steve, like my most reluctant readers would have had read like at least one to like 1 to 3 books that year by themselves, and before they weren't doing that. So, and it just, again, I don't know, it's just such a nice feeling to know that, you know what, that's like 1 to 3 books that you didn't touch before. That's more than what you've done. And so it's, yeah. And again, like, it's just, we want, right. So Margie said in the comments, right? Really hard when kids don't see themselves reflected in the stories we make them read in school. It's so true. Because again, growing up Filipino in South Georgia, the amount of stories that I read about white men, why? Like, I could not see myself in those stories. And I had to really try to get engaged with that as well, right? And so, I mean, we could go on about like a list of why reading is just not accessible. Reading is not sustainable for some students. Reading is not fun anymore because it's like, oh, I have to read 50 pages in one night. But why? Like, I have a life outside of school, right? Like, I'm taking 6 other classes. I can't read that many pages. And so,
And it's
scaffolding, choices,
boring.
options. Yes, exactly. It's so, yes, that too. That too. Like, you
Like,
know
I
what?
don't want to read about this. And I'm with Steve right there. I'm right there with Steve, where I also did not like reading. When I was in early elementary, I really enjoyed it, but where there was colorful and where were pictures and there weren't as much text on every single page. But when I got into honors English, because I had straight A's, I got into honors English and I'm supposed to be reading over the summer when I would rather be out playing in the river. I'm having to stay inside and read this book, but I had undiagnosed ADHD and I couldn't stay focused. I remember being in 5th grade and not being able to read a single paragraph in social studies class and know what it said. And it was because I didn't have that auditory thing. So, like, my mom would actually record herself and then I would listen to it while I was reading the books in high school. You're right, it's not accessible for every single student. And if we allowed that in our classrooms in a variety of ways earlier in our classrooms, we would get kids even more interested in what they were doing and then also allow choice because those old books that are centuries years old are boring.
What? That's what I read every night. Um,
You read Star Wars, dude. I know.
so to be fair, I'm not reading a Star Wars book right now. Um,
Oh,
I don't know if anybody has, like, those that watch, like, that have access to Apple TV and all the shows. So a really good show called Silo. If you've seen that, but I realized that there's a whole book series on it. So now I'm like way into this like book series. So it's kind of the other way around where people are like they read and then they watch the show. I'm doing it backwards. Um, TR, it's kind of like what you're talking about instructionally, right? Like what you're doing or what you were doing perhaps in the classroom, and maybe what you're doing with adults now is, again, the title of this pod or this episode of like disrupting
traditional
those
teaching
traditional
practices.
teaching practices. And when I saw you wrote that when you booked in, I'm like, that's me. That's like I want to be a part of that campaign and have this chat. So tell us a little bit more about that. Let's start with, like, why should there be a disruption to begin with?
Okay, great question. And I have a quick answer for it. There was like a quote that I read somewhere. It was a book that I was reading, of course. And it was like, if someone from the 1800s were to come into our world now, the only thing that would make sense would be education.
Uh-huh.
And
Yes.
think about it. Think about it.
Oh,
We're
yeah.
still in a box. There's still lined rows. There's still a teacher up at the front of the room. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, yes, we have technology now. Cool. But for the most part, right, the traditional way is getting up there and lecturing, talking at students, and then hoping that they get something, right? So
Mm.
because I was part of that, we have created this. We've created passive learners. We've created learned helplessness. We've created, all of these things that we like to blame our students of doing, right? Like saying, oh, well, my students' apathy, like they don't care. They don't want to do it. like nobody's engaged. And I'm like, okay, but can we take a step back and reevaluate what are we doing in the classroom? If we are standing in front of the classroom for more than 25 minutes, I mean, I would say 10 minutes because, like Sophie, I also have ADHD. So if you're talking at me for more than like 10 minutes and not giving me time to
Mm,
process, I already forgot what you said. Um, and that's the thing, right? Like, we had this whole notion of no child left behind, which I think is a beautiful phrase. No child left behind. And at the same time, we just steamrolled everyone else who weren't on the same pace as everybody, right? When we talk about curriculum, yeah, right, we have mandated curriculum, and there's a suggested or mandated pacing that teachers have to follow, right? And because of that, it also is really infuriating because our learners don't learn the same way. They don't learn the same time. They don't learn. They're different individuals in the classroom. And so if we're talking at them for however many minutes long, now mind you, I did this also for 9 years because I didn't know any better, and I just thought this was the way it's been done, right? And that's typically what happens. Teachers teach the way that they were taught.
They were taught.
It is
Exactly.
comfortable. It is so comfortable for us to teach the way we were taught because that's what we saw. And it's scary to try something new because we think that students are going to revolt, right? They're going to take over. They're not gonna, it's even gonna be more chaos if we don't always have this control in the front. And that's so harmful in so many ways, right? Because if we're learning is a community thing to do, right? Like, learning is so much more fun when you're doing it with others. But if we're just expecting for the teacher in the front of the classroom to teach us all the things all the time, then what am I going to have time to collaborate and be thought partners with my peers, right?
mm,
Another thing I heard too is that, the smartest person in the room is the room. So why are we taking up all of this airspace, right? Why are we
love
the
that.
one that's always constantly talking? And instead of, and also, some of us have 40 minutes to teach. Some of us have 90 minutes to teach, right? And if we just focus on lecturing and not actually provide a space for students to practice what they're learning and expect them to do that at home, that's never going to happen. And then we get frustrated when kids are failing. We get frustrated when kids aren't engaged. We get frustrated when kids just don't get it, right? It's because we actually don't provide this time for students to process the way that they need to process and then practice the way that they need to practice. So traditionally, lectures, goodness gracious, I did it for 9 years. And I saw how I could be as engaging as I want to be, and I think I am so engaging, but my students are sometimes probably like, wow, this is a really long lesson. And instead of asking a
Mm,
question that actually relates to the topic, I'm going to ask if I can go use the restroom or go mess with, my neighbor next to me. And then there's this whole behavior thing coming up, right? So again, the traditional way of teaching and learning it has not helped anyone for the longest time, right? For the longest time. And I mean, Margie said it, right? Like, we're still doing that factory model. Um, and it's scary to think that way. And I believe it was like another book, and maybe it was the UDL and blended learning book that we did with Margie and our communities together. Yes, that's another
she
one.
had it
Love.
unlocked.
Okay, beautiful. Um, and they talked about the history of education, right? It is factory led. It is all
Mm,
about,
mhm.
like, it is around working hours. It is based on people complying. Um, and
Industrial revolution, like
right,
that.
Yeah,
That's the
that's
they come
it.
context.
into they come into your box, you shove your information, your product into them, and then you move them onto the next box to get more stuff shoved into them. And you just hope it sticks.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really unfortunate, right? That the skills to ask questions, to challenge the tasks, right? To I don't know, provide ideas, right? Like, it's not encouraged or invited. If anything, it just like brings
Well,
up more like, "Oh my gosh, what are you doing? No, this is what we have to follow."
you're punished. You're punished for it because that was me. I questioned. things because I was curious, and I also like have ADHD, so my brain went a lot faster than a lot of my peers. And I'm like, why are we doing it this way when this like doesn't make sense? And I did that in high school in sports. I questioned the coach because things didn't make sense, and you'd get punished for it because you were questioning authority. And I am like, oh no, because I said so. And I'm like, but why doesn't it make sense? Like the whole like justice and logic is strong in me, and so I would challenge stuff and then get in trouble all the time.
Yeah, and I think that's why we as a society are struggling with critical thinking skills now.
You're not
Mhm.
allowed to.
Yeah.
You know, like
Just
you don't know
learn
how
what
to
I
do
tell you.
right. You don't know how to do research, right? Let me say we don't know how to do research. We don't want to take the time to learn how to do research on things that we hear about rather than just like, oh, okay, this person said it, so it must be true. um, and so again, like the traditional way of teaching and learning, we don't get to teach those skills really because we're just constantly saying this is the thing that we're learning and don't ask any questions. We don't have time actually to ask any questions because we have to keep going. I have this
Right?
curriculum that I need to cover. You have to take a test. You have to actually ace this test. So like let's talk about the content as opposed to here are some life skills that you're going to need to be a productive and high functioning citizen in this world. And that's wild to me. That's wild to me. It's 2025, y'all. Like,
uh
Pace.
yeah. So like because TR, you had mentioned earlier something that like really stood out to me was this whole concept of like 40 minutes. You have 40 minutes to do stuff, or you have 90. Um, Towards the end of me being in the high school classroom, there was a huge debate because our school is going to vote block schedule or not.
mm,
And the majority was keep it traditional. I may have been the only nerd on campus that was ready to make like vote block 2020 or whatever year it was, right? And I I remember having conversations with teachers that were like not being mean to me, but being like, "Steve, you cannot how would you teach for 90 minutes?" And something clicked in my head. I'm like, "Oh, they're they're they don't know they don't know how to like get in their head that like they in their head I'm gonna have to lecture for 90 minutes." And
mhm,
me, 90 minutes to me was like the vibe because wait, I get to what does that look like with my already existing flipped classroom? What does that look like with the project-based learning and design thinking stuff that I was doing with my students? I'm like, dude, I get to have way more time to do some really cool stuff in one sitting, right? Instead of, I was like, there'll be less homework. There'll be like, and really, it's like for me, what we're talking about, and TR is kind of like, where I'm going with this is like, how do we shift this? Right.
mhm,
And because it does feel like an uphill battle, particularly if you look like how credentialing is still being handled. Right. And then also like they've been teaching like this for a long time. Like what and I guess my question for you is like, what have you seen with the work that you've been doing that maybe like a little bit of light of how we could move the needle?
That's a great question. Definitely teacher mindset, right? Let's
Mm,
kind of let's have these conversations of why do you teach the way you teach, right? Let's take a step back and think about that because I work for Modern Classrooms Project, and we've done a lot of really innovative stuff, and we have this instructional model that I wholeheartedly believe in because it's just transformed the way that I taught um, about whatever concept I was teaching, right? And so when we think about gosh, see, I lost my train of thought because I'm just so passionate about this model. Um, Teacher mindset. So I've worked with a lot of teachers, right? They find us, they find the model because something's not working in their classroom and they want to create something different for their students and for themselves, right? And so they actually come and find us. And when you
mm,
have educators who find you and who want, I'm going to change, I want to do this thing, I'm going to do, whatever it takes to create something different for my students because it's clearly not working, that's different. Those teachers have already done the reflection piece, right? And then we have another group of teachers who come in because of the top down, like, hey, we're doing this, you got to do it. And so those are the more reluctant educators. And I don't say that in a bad way. I say that in a way that, like, hey, you know what? They're questioning it, they're challenging it, which is dope. Like, definitely challenge it, definitely question it. And then come to find out it is a lot of fear behind doing something different, right? Like, what do you mean that what I'm doing is not working? Right? Like, it's kind of that wake up call of like, wait, but I thought everything is fine, right? Like, but
Mm.
my students are seated there and they're quiet and they're not acting out. So like that means I'm doing well, right? And so when it comes to teacher mindset, at Modern Classrooms, we have blended learnings, mastery-based learning, and then as well as self-paced learning, right? And those are three phrases that educators have heard over and over again. So they could tell you what it means. But I think what's missing and what our instructional model does really well is the support, right? The how. And this is, Steve, you're talking about like, oh, teachers, like, oh man, you mean to tell me I have to lecture for 90 minutes, right? I think when we create, again, or provide a space where we say, okay, we're going to scaffold this actually, right? We're going to scaffold this and we're going to give you time to process and to plan and to implement, and then give you grace to make mistakes. I think teachers will be a lot more open to that, right?
Mm.
Teachers will be a lot more, they would feel a lot more motivated to try something new if they know that they're not going to be penalized. I think, we have these expectations of teachers to scaffold for their students, but I think sometimes we don't scaffold things for teachers. And that is so frustrating. And so, me as a teacher as well, I was outspoken and I was going to say whatever I wanted to say. Okay. I got in a lot of trouble for it. And it is what it is. I'm like, okay, this is just not my environment. I can't show up the way I need to show up. And so, for me, I would just always, I was that type of educator that would say, why do we need to do that? Show me how to do that. You're docking points off of my evaluation because you're saying I can't do something. Okay, cool. Teach me. Come into my classroom and teach me. Show me how it's supposed to be done. And I have been met by school leaders saying, like, actually, no, here are 3 1-hour videos that you can watch about differentiation. I don't have time to show you how to do it. And so it's just always that excuses. So then I was like up in arms, like, okay, cool, you can't show me, so I'm gonna keep doing what I'm doing. So I think like we really need to, again, provide teachers a space to, because we've been criticized over and over and over again, if not by admin, by other stakeholders, if not stakeholders, community, right? Like during COVID, if you think about it, like at first teachers, everyone's like, oh my gosh, teachers are doing so much work because I can't believe that this is what they've been doing, right? And then all of a sudden, I don't know when it shifted, but it was like back to, oh, teachers are the worst. Like y'all aren't actually doing your jobs. So it's always constantly like a back and forth. So I get why teachers are up in arms and say like, you know what, I'm just going to keep teaching the way that other people and I'm used to teaching so that I don't have to deal with any of these other mess, right? So I get it. That we got to create a psychologically safe space for teachers to make mistakes,
Mm.
to play and be creative, and we also need to trust them to do the job that they actually want to do, because I
with
mean, honestly, like,
dignity and respect. Like,
right,
Yes.
yeah.
right,
Yes.
exactly.
And yeah, and like kind of what you're speaking on, like the bigger picture, I feel is like the whole system,
The whole
because
Yes.
we teachers, like you're talking about giving teachers that safe space, that safe environment. They don't have that space, nor do they have the time, even if that space were found. And then you're talking about like the leader level on the administrative side. A good administrator will do some walkthroughs and support, offer guidance, but then you also have the leaders that are, they're gotcha type of leaders. Like they'll poke in. I'm like, how many cell phones do I see out? Where's the objective? Like you have like those gotcha kind of moments. But even like the administrators that are doing that really good work, like they don't have the time and space to, right? Like I it just feels like our buckets are very full and we don't know where to find room. Like where do we prioritize? And if this goes on, for X amount of time, this problem is going to snowball into a kind of a situation that we're not really even envisioning, because like you said it earlier, it's kind of crusty out there.
And I want to do track back, and if it seemed like I was attacking school leaders, it's not it at all. It was just more so the system, right? Because there's school leaders and then there's district leader.
Mhm.
Like, it just keeps going up and up and up, and it's always the pressure of just continuing to do things the way that we've been doing it.
Mm.
Because again, there's no energy, and the way there's no energy, there's no time. And the way that I'm seeing it now, Steve, is that there's a lot of distractions, right? It's either we welcome those distractions and say, oh, okay, cool. You know what? Here's a distraction. I'll take care of that. Here's another distraction. I'll take care of that. Or we actually, like you said, prioritize figuring out how can we create a learning environment, whatever that learning environment is. How can we create a learning environment where people are feeling brave and safe in this space so that
Mhm.
people can actually do their jobs and students can actually learn, and then everyone is happy? Like, I don't know. It's just there's a lot of distractions in the world, right? Like, what do we focus on? Do we focus on those distractions, or do we focus on the things that we actually want to create for our youth? I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, and I know it's easier said than done, but the
Mhm.
system is definitely something.
Uh,
Well, and the
so
system that we've had for so long has been based on like these laws and funding.
Yep.
So we're just trying to ensure that we are compliant. Because I've been thinking about this a lot. Like, they're just trying to stay compliant and keep the money going. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's what certain levels, district ones specifically, state ones specifically, that are just trying to keep things going. Like, yes, we want to make sure that we're still educating the future. So we've got to be compliant, and we've got to make sure we keep the money, and we got to be compliant. So we keep the money, and we go like, and then that sort of trickles down to the school level, district level, and the school level. Like, we just got to stay compliant and keep the money. And then that stress trickles down to the teachers. And the way you stay compliant and keep the money is make sure you're following the IEPs and get good test scores. Like, so then that just trickles down and trickles down until that stress also goes to the students. We have some students that are in third
Mhm.
grade having panic attacks over their first standardized test in third grade.
That's wild. That's so wild to me. And it's not surprising, right? And this cycle
No.
continues because, like you said, it's tied to funding. And if we don't have funding, then how can we continue to do the work that we need to do, right? And I think there's also this unset expectation of instant gratification. So it's like, hey, we want to try something different. And then it's this, again, expectation. Okay, you're going to try something different, but we need to see results right now. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? And
no.
it's like, no, that's not how that
That's not
works.
how it
It
works.
takes time. It
No.
takes time to change.
It's not how it works. My first 3 years teaching, I was in a very rural area, and I was introduced to it was Carnegie Learning curriculum. It was very student centered project, like real world problems. I was a math teacher, very reading, doing, and collaborating within groups. I'm not in front of the room teaching you how to do it, and then you're just going to regurgitate and practice the thing that I did. But it was very, you're going to figure it out. What do we need to do based on what you learned? And I thrived in that. And the test scores went up. The kids were really understanding. The kids enjoyed coming to class because they were talking and doing projects, and we were trying to have like fun and have discussions. And then other teachers were like, well, my kids aren't actually doing that when they were trying to do the same strategies, because the district bought this, then we were trying to do this new thing. So the other teachers were really struggling because they didn't know how to shift to that student-centered environment. They were
Mm.
very traditional. Y'all are quiet. I'm going to be teaching up here. We'll do some hands-on activities like surface area cover and make the package pretty around Christmas time, but you're going to be quiet when you're doing it, and we're not talking about anything else. Like,
Yeah. I mean, and if you think about it too, I mean, it still goes on, right? Like,
yes,
we have a new curriculum, and it's on you to figure it out.
Mm.
yes.
And
it's
then
sort of
if
the
we have,
buy-in too. Even if you have
yeah,
training, have they bought into the training, or are they just sitting there rolling their eyes in the back of the training?
but and also like, okay, we have training, but is it just the presenter talking the whole entire time? Or do they actually have time to implement and plan and do the things that you're asking them to do? So if you're telling me that we go into a PD that's 2 hours long and you're talking at me the entire time and telling me I need to do this, need to do that, and here's the new
Mm.
curriculum, but then you don't give me time to look at it in those 2 hours, when am I supposed to do that? Like, and then now I'm thinking, I'm like, this has to be the same way with students, right? Like, if we're going to tell students that we want them to do something, we need to provide time for them to process and practice and play around with it in those
Mm.
40 to 90 minutes of class time that we have with them. Because if we're just saying, like, okay, here, I'm going to introduce this concept and then you go do it on your own time, and we're expecting kids to do that, as an adult, I don't do that. You funny.
Right?
You had not to completely shift gears here, but like because TR you had mentioned modern classroom, just the work that you've done and the little collab that you've done with our friend Margie and with Cami. Like Sophie and I know what modern classroom is, but like for anybody that is listening, watching, what is modern classroom?
Oh my gosh, I should be prepared for this 2-minute spill, right? The way that I say it is that we create humanizing spaces where it's student-centered learning environments through blended self-paced and mastery-based learning. So what that means is it really is disrupting the traditional way of teaching, because you're no longer in the front of the classroom. You're actually creating instructional videos that students and any stakeholder can access whenever they want, so that there's transparency and there's access, right, as well. Um, and then we do self-pacing as well, where it's like you learn on your own time. Here's a video, right? If you need to play it 15 times for you to understand what we're saying, if you need to pause, if you have ADHD and you need breaks, go for it, right? You're not interrupting anyone else. Just know that there are suggested due dates and there is a hard deadline for some of these things. And so the self-pacing actually teaches students to be more what's this word? Like more efficient, right? They learn how to prioritize, they know time management skills, they make better decisions of who they can work with, who they can't work with. And then with mastery-based learning, when we're thinking about mastery-based learning, a lot of the times people think, or they go straight to grades, right? And this is another thing that we could talk about. But with mastery-based learning, we're really focusing on whether or not students mastered the concept. It's not,
Mm.
I'm grading them because of behavior. I'm grading them because of effort. I'm grading them because of attendance. I'm grading them because I'm having a bad day and I don't like this kid today. You know what I'm saying? No, it's like we're really focused on,
Participation.
exactly. We're really focused on mastery-based learning so that we can actually understand what kind of scaffolds do students need to know. And so I just said a lot of things, right? And again, I've said in the beginning, like these 3 phrases, our educators have heard of them. They can define them all day long. And Steve, you mentioned flip learning, right? We're not flip learning because I mean it's similar, but it's not, if that makes sense, right? So like the instructional videos are created and there's time for students to watch those instructional videos in the classroom. It's not an expectation that they watch it at home.
Mm.
And so we're really creating, again, this space where students have access to everything that they need to. They know the direction. They know how many lessons they need to master. They have clear expectations. And so it alleviates a lot of stress, because we talked about stress, right? We don't do a surprise element anymore of like, oh, surprise, you have a quiz today. No, like students actually know, okay, I have 5 lessons for this unit and I need to figure out how to manage my time so that I can fully understand and process all the skills that I'm learning in this classroom, right? So when we're thinking about personalization, we're talking about differentiation. We're talking about all of these things that we have been wanting our teachers to do, but never provided a training session for them that was actually like teachers creating the thing, right? And so I implemented the model my 10th year of teaching. And again, mind you, before I was like, oh, I know my students, right? My relationships with my students are great because I know them. They're being, I know who they are as human beings. But then if you ask me, hey, what's Jennifer struggling with academically? I'd be like, ooh,
Mm.
ooh, I'm struggling with that. So then when I implemented the model, I knew my students as human beings and I knew their strengths and their weaknesses academically as well. And I think that was a game changer for me because I could tell you individually what students were, what students' strengths were, what students were grappling with. And then, of course, I had students with, different types of learning abilities, right? So I had students with 504s, with IEPs. I had a lot of students who were learning English and students who were not diagnosed. And so being able to save my energy because I'm not in the front of the classroom anymore, really again made it more intentional and meaningful of how I engage with students during that class time that I have with them. So Modern Classrooms Project, we help our teachers create this space for students to thrive and for teachers to be able to take a breather, right? Like, oh, I don't have to be on the entire time. Like, I can actually go and have small groups with my students. I can go check in with my student one on one. Or if I have a visitor in the classroom, I can talk to them for a little bit because it's not interrupting the learning at all. And so, time and time again, we've just heard our educators say, like, wow, I thought about quitting teaching, but now with this model, like I want to stay for a while because it's a lot more attainable. It's a lot more sustainable. I feel so much better about work-life balance. And so we're an instructional model and we provide training for teachers to actually understand and implement blended, self-paced, and mastery-based learning environments. That's what we do. Longer than 2 minutes.
So I can't express how much my heart just grew over the last X amount of minutes, just hearing you describe all that. And it's because of one thing really. And like a teacher's energy from the start of the day to when they get home, that is what the like that's that's in the budget, baby. Like that's the bank account of energy. But where I think it's where things get lost is where are we pushing that energy out? How are we hitting that gas on the car of energy with respect to, cool, that's a lot of energy to talk at kids all day. But it's such a waste of energy if you think about the fact that you could be providing a learning environment where now your energy is more authentic, it's more meaningful, it is better scaffold, differentiated, and it just humanizes the whole thing, right? So, and I just love this approach of helping teachers and students figure out what that environment looks like. So good.
Yeah, and one thing too that I was thinking about, like just as an educator and working with so many educators, right? Like we're always so worried about students, which rightfully so. We should be worried about students. We should always constantly look for
Mhm.
ways to support our students, right? My thing is like, yes, and we also need to take care of our teachers. We need to take care of our teachers. Like, let's listen to the challenges that they have. And instead of providing more challenges for them, like, figure out how we can enhance what they're already doing so that they can actually breathe. Like, Sophie, when I implemented this model and I learned that my students were still learning even if I'm not in the classroom, when I tell you I went to so many conferences, I went on vacations, I was like gone a lot. And my students were like, yo, where are you? I'm like, hey, you're still learning though. um, and the subs absolutely loved my classroom because it just worked well. The students knew how to access all the things that they needed to access. And I wasn't stressed and I wasn't trying to grade everything all the time. It was
Mm.
just so much more, again, just sustainable for me as an educator. And I can actually, there's a work-life balance, which I never thought I would get, right? And that was my 10th year of teaching, that it's possible to go and attend things to expand my brain while my students' brains are also expanding. The learning doesn't stop, it continues. And that's what we want. We want that. We want that.
I love that. So
I love
good.
it.
I TR, we may have to have you back because I feel like there's so much more that we could unpack, but we are coming up to the, towards the end here. And but before we go, before we do all that, on this show, we do ask our guests that big question of, what is top of mind? What is under the hat for you right now in education? It could be something you've touched on, or it could be something that we've not discussed yet, but very keen to hear what is top of mind for you.
Yeah, Steve, this is a really great question. I recently did a Vipassana meditation of like 10 days of silent retreat, essentially meditating for 10 days, all day long. And one of the things that came
Mm.
up was they talked about appropriate effort. And I was just thinking about that. And I was like, wow, we're really trying to innovate education, which great, we should be innovating education, right? And I hear about all these efforts that's being done to innovate, but I haven't heard the appropriate effort, right? Like, because we can continue to try and to innovate, and we're not going anywhere because the effort that we're providing is not the appropriate effort for that space, if that makes sense. So I think like something that I'm thinking about is like, okay, how can we be more intentional with appropriate effort, right? Like efforts that will actually be appropriate to the surroundings that I'm in, to the communities that I'm in, to the student, for the students that I'm with. And so that's just been kind of sitting with me. Let's innovate. Cool. There's efforts. Yes. Okay, let's dig deeper. What are the appropriate efforts to make sure that innovation actually is implemented in a way that is going to make students and teachers feel successful, feel joy, feel all the things that we want them to feel when they're learning something new.
If if there's anything that can really get my head going and maybe like something to really think about over the weekend, it's that. I'll be honest, I've not put too much thought around that concept before, of like we work, right? We're educators, we're putting in that work, but I don't, like, for me, I never sit down and be like, is this the appropriate amount of work, or is this the appropriate amount of effort on X, Y, or Z? Uh, Sophie, am I alone here? Is that, how much have you thought about this?
I've definitely have thought about like intentional and purposeful use of technology and intentional purposeful use of tools and strategies and just in time teaching type thing. But I've never really thought like, so we put out this idea to do something new, like integrate AI in the classroom or something. But if you're still doing, like, if your end product still looks very similar to what you were doing before,
Mm,
that was a whole lot of effort to learn something for nothing to happen.
yeah.
So, yeah, I
And then
mean,
we're
yeah,
quick to say it didn't work.
yeah, like I used AI in my classroom and nothing happened. Like, but did you change anything about the way you were teaching? Did you put in the effort to learning it, but did you actually change anything about the way you were teaching to your students? It is interesting to think about. And I was a district coach for a bit too, and so it's interesting to think about even just the little datas that you would take throughout not the standardized data, but like
Mm,
the pulse checks, the temperature checks that you could potentially provide your students when you provide an accessible learning environment, even if it's just you can now chat in this Google question chat discussion rather than raise your hand and talk in class. This one particular teacher then realized that that quiet student actually knew what they were talking about. Or the kid that talks all the time has very surface level understanding of stuff. They're just yibbers. So
Mm-hmm.
they're good at BSing type of stuff. And that the kids didn't actually understand the concept he was trying to teach. And that data that you can gather by putting effort into making things more accessible for all learners, being a little bit more student centered, was really eye-opening for him because he thought his kids really knew what they were doing because this one or two students always said the right answers in class.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, dude, there's more than those two kids in your class.
Those two are so good, though.
Those two are good.
High engagement, high engagement.
Oh man, yeah. So TR, just really, really love that answer. Thank you for sharing. I know that
That's amazing.
everybody that listens, that's watching, like, I know they're really going to get a lot out of this conversation. And folks, if you do want to learn more, and TR will go to like put this up on the screen here. Classroom Flex. I love that. That is so good. So TR, that's where you can, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's where anyone could find you, like social media wise, right?
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And the other thing too, I do have a thing here to share for those that are watching. Um, we have the Modern Classroom website. I believe this is the site.
Yep.
So folks can come in here, check stuff out. We have like the blended, the self-paced. TR, anything you would want to share about in terms of navigating the site or how to use it?
Yeah, I mean, play around with it. It depends on what you're interested in, right? If you want to do research, go to the Discover Impact. There's a lot of research based off of what we have gathered from just educators and school leaders in states who have implemented our model. Because I know
Mhm.
research is important to a lot of people, which is really nice. Go for it, right? Do the research. One of the things that I would highly suggest too is, you see that that orange button on the right where it says course login. We do have a free course. So if you want to check it out, this is again not saying you have to do the entire course. So if you're like, you know what, I got blended learning, I want to learn more about self-pacing because that's where I'm struggling with, do the self-pacing. And in the free course as well, you'll see other content as well. So it's like teaching English in a modern classrooms or teaching special education in modern classrooms, like what all that entails. Another thing too that I would highlight is our Facebook group. It has over
Mm.
20,000 educators in the Facebook group, and it is just so live and popping. Like it's a whole vibe out there, right? Like I feel like it's a party of, like sometimes it's a really great party where everyone is just sharing their celebrations. And then sometimes, it's like one of those like, okay, let's be real. Here are some challenges and I need
Mm.
help, right? And our teachers just, I don't know, they share resources, they hype each other up. Like I don't have to do anything. I just read through the comments and I'm like, dang, they said it better than I did. And so definitely check out the Facebook group. That is just that's where all the magic happens, I feel like. We have our own podcast, so if you like hearing from me, um, we do have our Modern Classrooms Project podcast. We release an episode every week, and I really try to uplift the voices that we don't hear from often, right? So that could be educators of color, it could be content that we don't really cover, like family and consumer sciences, but just really just finding school leaders, thought leaders, to expand our brain and have, more interesting conversations about all the things. So definitely check that out as well.
Yeah, please do. I have listened to your pod. Um, I it's really good, and I've not listened to a lot of episodes. Obviously, I listened to the one with Margie, um,
Obviously.
for best friend reasons. Yes, so um, I will say, just like I love just how authentic you are on your pod. Like this is just who I am, and it's like everything about it is the vibe, and I just really enjoyed listening to it. So I just want to give you that shout.
No, thank you so much. It kind of, like you said, we had a conversation about um, who can I show up in this space? Like, how can I show up in this space? And so I just really appreciate. I think that's one of the things that I'm taking away too is that when we model showing up as ourselves, it
Mm.
provides this opportunity for other people to also show up as themselves because again, right? Like the world is crusty. So why do we want to continue creating crusty spaces when we can create a space that's really fun and engaging and a space where we're not going to be punished or made fun of or anything like that, right? So like, let's make mistakes, let's crack jokes, let's laugh at all of our um, things that have happened that are embarrassing. And yeah, so just thank you for inviting me in this space, Steve and Sophie. This is so great, and allowing me to just talk because I love talking.
I do plan on adding crusty to my everyday vocabulary. Don't worry, I'll give you credit. It's so
It's
good.
so great, right? It's so
Yeah.
great.
It allows you to be like, cool, I'm gonna call something out without being super toxic about it. Like,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes. And I mean,
crusty spaces.
right. And it makes people laugh too, right? Like, you know, if someone says
Yeah.
some wild things, I'd be like, wow, that was really crusty. And that's the response is like, wait, did you just say crusty? And I'm like, yeah, because what you said was crusty. Like, so,
Oh my
you know,
gosh.
we gotta have fun. We gotta have fun.
Absolutely,
I love it.
absolutely. All right. Well, TR, thank you so much. Really appreciate you, coming on, sharing your wisdom, sharing your insight. Thanks for everybody out there that's watching, listening. Continue to share that love, give us that love. We're going to announce something pretty soon for the month of March. So stay tuned. We can't reveal it yet, but it is going to be very Marchy up in March. And so be on the lookout with that. Sophie, what do you got there?
Might have
Don't,
a little hint.
are you serious? Oh, you gave a hint? Yeah, you kind of did.
Hint.
Oh my gosh. I can't take you anywhere. Anyway, well, friends, enjoy the rest of your Saturday. As always, keep your hats on, but your minds open. Until next time. Bye-bye.